Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Rules Don't Apply. It's been 15 years since Warren Beatty's been in a movie, and it's been since 1998 that Warren Beatty was in a movie and maybe someone saw it. And I think when you're thinking of a late director, you think of what this movie appears to be, which is a period piece, very stodgy, very slow, very adhering to kind of an older kind of structure film like, Woody Allen's doing now, a very safe, studio-friendly kind of older director thing, and it's not really usually that interesting. Most older directors don't make something like Fury Road. They make like what Woody Allen's doing, or what Spielberg does a lot, but to much better effect with Bridge of Spies. But Rules Don't Apply doesn't adhere to any of that, because most of the time when I was watching this movie, I was like, what the fuck is this? Oh my god. It just, like, the beginning cuts were happening like crazy. Like, the flow to it is astronomically, nonsensically awful. Saying this movie is mildly uneven is a mercy killing. This movie is horrible, fascinating, not very good, horrible again, fascinating in that way. You're like, I'm glad I saw this, but I never want to see this again because I'm just confused that anyone thought this was at all acceptable. Rules Don't Apply makes sense for a movie like this because in terms of like genre, filmmaking, and just like serviceable editing for an entire motion picture, this film doesn't follow any rules. It's kind of like that kid who makes nonsense art whose parents are like, oh, he's a free spirit, and you're like, this art sucks. It's interesting, but it sucks. And that's Rules Don't Apply. It makes me wonder, like, so why did we think this crazy movie we've been hearing about all this time from this guy who's been gone for all this time, that he could come back and make something that was anyway decent? At kind of its most sensical, I guess, is that it's like two separate movies colliding in at once and not being either. And that's the best this movie is. I don't think it's the worst movie of the year. It's definitely the worst edited. Like, how did they release this? It looked like someone put trash on the film. They just dumped the film on the ground, put trash on it, took a dump on it, lit it on fire, and that makes as much sense what I just said as maybe this movie, but I don't think so. This film is about Howard Hughes. This is a film that feels like if Howard Hughes' mental illness, not Howard Hughes himself, just if his mental illness became sentient and left his body and directed a movie, I think that would be this movie. And you might think like maybe he's directing it because he was playing Howard Hughes and it like influenced this movie, and this is how Howard Hughes would see himself in this weird Hollywood melodrama. Maybe, but that doesn't make it good or watchable. It looks like someone who left Hollywood for too long, sort of remembers what it used to be like, can't even do that. I wish this movie had rules. Why did they not apply to this movie? Because this is like, wow, I got to bear witness to something that I am like, holy fuck. Warren Beatty, you didn't just lose it. I don't even know if you even had it anymore. In 1964, you have a guy named Frank who's a driver for and an assistant sort of eventually for Howard Hughes, and he's never met Howard Hughes for a long time, and then he has to go pick up this girl played by Lily Collins from the airport, and then he starts falling in love with her and driving everywhere. Then they both eventually meet Howard Hughes played by Warren Beatty, and he becomes more of Howard Hughes' assistant, and she is kind of this actress who lives in a house who he just kind of pays and stuff to just live in a house. She barely gives a screen test because Howard Hughes is crazy. And then you see Howard Hughes go through various things, from losing TWA and having all this sort of things with people trying to lend him money, and that kind of supposedly ending in hilariousness. It sort of is an unrequited love thing between Lily Collins' character and Aiden Ehrenreich, but it also is about Howard Hughes' troubles with mental illness and dealing with these actresses at RKO, and that's sort of what it's about, I think. I knew this wasn't good, alright? I didn't think I was walking into a masterpiece, but I was curious. I'm kind of fascinated by Warren Beatty. I think he's probably overrated. When people go, oh, Warren Beatty, I'm go, oh, you mean the guy who hasn't probably made a movie I actually really, really love since like 1972? As much as I love McCabe and Miss Miller and Bonnie and Clyde and Shampoo, and I nostalgically like Dick Tracy for this weird kind of post Tim Burton's Batman thing that it is. Most of his stuff, like Ishtar, which is kind of an interesting movie, although not a great one, and same with like a lot of his stuff, I think is highly overrated and hasn't made enough movies to warrant kind of the status or Warren the status that he really has. And Rules Don't Apply is kind of like all that white privilege and Hollywood bullshit mix up into one, that he can't like let the unrequited love thing be its own movie, and him just being this co-starring Howard Hughes, he has to make Howard Hughes an extra storyline, which like does not work at all, and just feels like he's so vain he can't stop himself. Like, this is sort of like Ishtar in a way, that Ishtar was trying to do the road movies sort of, and this is trying to be like a film that he's very famous for being in, Splendor in the Grass. And I think this sort of tries to do this and harken back to that, and that, I guess, in a way is interesting. I can kind of understand how Rules Don't Apply fell apart, because he has these ideas that sometimes don't work, but he's so in love with them that he keeps them in anyway, and no one's going to say no to him. And sometimes you get fascinating, interesting things like Ishtar or Dick Tracy. Sometimes you get a garbage fire, I think is too much organization for what this movie is, but that's kind of what you get with this, is just seeing his whole style and ethos and auteur theory fall apart within his hands. I honestly think this might be a film to show evidence that Warren Beatty has dementia, and I'm not saying that to make fun of people with dementia. I'm saying that because holy fuck, this movie. What was this? It's so uneven. It is like so many different styles and things. It cuts to like footage at the time. It's sort of trying to do in that what Scorsese did with The Aviator. When people let this movie go, I'm just like, I can't get into it. The flow is so weird. And then it has plot lines that never come back and are introduced for reasons that I do not understand. There's like Matthew Broderick's character. They suddenly cut to things about him, and that never really works out in any way. And he has like several plot lines. It's like, hey, and what's Matthew Broderick up to right now? And I'm like, what? And like, sometimes it just felt like this film shot far too much footage, that he did far too much research. Sometimes they'd say something about Howard Hughes, they go, oh, that's interesting. And then suddenly the movie would be like, what's Matthew Broderick up to? And he's like, oh, hey, I'm driving somebody somewhere. And you're like, what? What? How is this gonna connect? And like, sometimes some things do later, and you're like, maybe this movie is gonna repair itself in the end magically, despite that not making any sense with film grammar or structure or whatever, but let's maybe hope. And it doesn't. This is horrible. Like, whoa. I'm just like astonished that like Norm in the North is like still the worst, but this is just like, oh my god, because Rules Don't Apply, clearly not to making this movie. Ugh, just I can't. Whoa. Like, if I was a studio head and someone played this, I'd be like, is this a joke? You know that scene in Ed Wood where they're like, is this a joke? This is a joke, right? No, this is the real, unless it was. No one was in the theater. No one was in the theater, by the way. I knew no one would be in the theater. I knew I had to see this. I wanted to see the fascination and falling from grace that is Warren Beatty's late career, which fascinates me in the way that like, wow, you guys are just gonna let him keep making nonsense. Okay. Pretending like Bonnie and Clyde's gonna happen again. This film, I just think they didn't shoot scenes fully, or they improv'd and scenes took too long. Once this film calms down a little, then it just cuts. It's so disruptive in its editing, it's hard to get into. Like, I've never seen a film that fucks itself so much in editing. Like, I don't know. I just don't know what to make of this. It's kind of like a wonder of nonsense. I just hate this movie. I hate it. I don't like it. I'm fascinated that I saw it. I don't ever want to see it again, but I feel like if I watched it with a couple beers, now that I'm thinking about it, I would probably start being like, just have fun yelling at it. There are certain movies I just love the nonsense flow of them, like The Blind Side's one of them. While I'm watching, I'm like, how was society okay with, I mean, Blind Side, there's a whole bunch of other stuff in that one. That's a little loaded, but Rules Don't Apply. Just like, how did people give Warren Beatty money? There needs to be a book and a documentary. Like, there should have been one about Ishtar. If they had made a documentary about the making of Ishtar, if that had happened, I think the sequel documentary should have been with this, because you're like, what? Oh, and I'm not even going to get into that Warren Beatty has a creepy relationship with Lily Collins, and we get to watch him grab her butt and make out with her. Certain people try to kind of bring this movie down and kind of get it to work. Martin Sheen, Candice Bergen, Annette Bening, who's being a really great wife by just simply being in this and not stopping her husband from making this movie. Even Matthew Broderick, who is in this and seemingly makes no sense most of the time why we spend so much time with his plotline. I think honestly there is a story in here, and if someone were to take the story of Rules Don't Apply and make a much better movie, I think there is a movie in that. I think there is a movie there to be seen and to be told, where you see the character that Alden Ulrich, and see him get more and more involved in the Howard Hughes company and have less and less of a social life and lose his relationship relationship with Lily Collins, and you see him kind of transforming it colder, and see how like this crazy businessman kind of ruins his life. And you could do an interesting thing, seeing like almost like in The Godfather, where you see Michael become more and more part of the family. You could have easily, I think this film could have done that, and I think this film sort of tries to. It doesn't know what movie it wants to be. I don't even think it has a theory for what it's trying to do. It tries to be an old Hollywood movie. It tries to have a song, a titular song called Rules Don't Apply. That's kind of the closest thing for a rule that there is in it. It tries to be a comedy. It tries to be a melodrama. It tries to be a big Hollywood epic. It tries to be a lot of things, and it doesn't work for any of them. It doesn't really even work with the style he's using it for. It's not that I hate kind of old Hollywood epics and melodramas and think they're old hat and I should hate them. I like a lot of those, to be honest with you. Rules Don't Apply doesn't officially do that. Those were like very sculpted and studio labored over to be made and made into these old Hollywood epics. This should have had some rules, and I think every time like Rules Don't Apply, you should have done that. This is like, I guess that's like the theory behind making it. It's not an experimental film. It is just a mess. It is so bad. If this is Warren Beatty's last film, some people retire gracefully and other people are like, maybe you should just go now. You're getting weird. A lousy biopic, poorly edited in a frenetic way. It's like waking up from a dream and going, what the fuck was that? I don't want to think about that anymore. I hope this is a dream I forget. It's not like a fever dream. It's like a dream and you wake up, and you know that part in Inception where you're like, I realize it's a dream and now I'm gonna wake up, but you stayed in it too long, but it keeps going, and you're like, I'm in an empty theater watching Rules Don't Apply, an epic monster mess of a movie, and I wish they had maybe stopped him from making it, or he had stopped himself from making it, because seeing his style and his theories and his own director, auteur, filmmaking ideas kind of crash and burn in such a way was fascinating and interesting, but it's kind of sad as well. Something I think cinephiles would enjoy to talk about, how they saw a terrible, ridiculous flow of an odd movie that just wasn't very good. And I guess that's kind of how Warren Beatty is going to go out, from someone who brought in new Hollywood and was part of this bad boy of 70s and 60s filmmaking, and you know, spanning all these eras and working with all these directors, to end up with a regrettable comeback of a nonsense flow clusterfuck edited. And a clusterfuck is giving this film too much credit in terms of its flow of nonsense and just craziness that's even hard to get into as a viewer. This is anti-cinema's anti-cinema, and I think it was actually trying to be a populist movie, maybe. I don't even think people who never see movies would like this. This is a mess to behold that you won't soon forget, and probably society as a whole will. But much like how people forgot Ishtar, you're missing out on something by not seeing it. But unlike Ishtar, watching Rules Don't Apply doesn't have any real redeemable value other than you sitting there and going, I witnessed something, but I don't ever want to do that again. So if you've seen Rules Don't Apply and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. No one's here. Here's what it's like seeing Rules Don't Apply.
You want to make sure that it is a sense of perfection. It has to almost go beyond